Welcome back to the report. Now, the terrorist threat level in Britain was raised to severe earlier this year after fears of a terrorist attack being carried out by individuals linked to the conflict in Syria and Iraq. As a result, the Muslim community has been under increased suspicion. Afzal Ahmed has this report.
Counter-terrorism officers are continuing to question 4 men today, including one suspected of having links to Islamic State, on suspicion of plotting a terrorist attack on Britain. The men in their early 20s were arrested in dawn raids across London yesterday to disrupt what police say were the early stages of a significant plot. Met Police Chief Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe expressed that it was a serious case and that the drumbeat around terrorism has changed. This is linked to British government fears of fighters from Syria and Iraq allegedly coming back to the UK to commit terror acts at home.
Hello.
The fear has caught up aid workers and individuals expressing grievances about the Syrian conflict, with the most public case of ex-Guantanamo inmate Mohsen Beg bringing it to light. Beg was arrested in February along with 3 others on charges of attending a terrorist training camp in Syria and possessing documents related to terrorism. This month he was vindicated of all charges, which many say was a clear example of the UK police arresting a man on speculation only to be embarrassed later when found innocent. The case of Beg and many others have highlighted the broad and vague perimeters of counter-terrorism legislation in the UK, which is ironically regarded as one of the most extensive in the world. Such definitions, some say, can lead to unjust convictions and can expose people to harsh sanctions. It also increases the possibility of arbitrary or discriminatory prosecutions, including lengthy periods of pre-trial detention. Amnesty International this week has called on the United Kingdom to review its legislation to ensure that its definition of terrorism and terrorism-related activity comply with international legal standards.
I'm sure needs very little introduction from me.
It seems the world has joined in on stepping up on anti-terror measures, with the Australian police force carrying out huge raids last month, causing the Muslim community there to come out in uproar. In Japan and the US this week, police have arrested groups of men suspected of planning to go to Syria to join IS. While attacks on homes are a legitimate concern for governments and action should be taken, is the fear resulting in unjust legislation being overlooked and innocent bystanders being caught up in the net? Afzal Ahmed, The Report, Islam Channel.
Well, joining me to discuss all this on the line are Dr Julian Richards, co-director of the Centre for Security and Intelligence Studies at Buckingham University, and Dr Rizwaan Sabir, lecturer in social sciences at Edge Hill University and a specialist in counter-terrorism policy. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Dr Richards, do you think we're in danger now of tipping over from a legitimate concern to an illegitimate infringement on civil liberties?
Well, of course, there always are risks that arrests are made, and in a heightened security environment as we have now, cases aren't very robust when they come to court. Clearly, the situation with Mohsen Beg was most unsatisfactory and was something of an own goal on the government's part, and we don't know all the the reasons and the details that the case was dropped, but clearly that's not something went horribly wrong there, so there was a problem. However, the government's trying to balance serious and real security concerns. These things are going on in Syria and Iraq. People are travelling out from the UK to take part, so there is a risk there, and it's a delicate balancing act that needs to be struck.
I mean, the Mohsen Beg case, what do you make of that? Because, we do know a little about it. We're never going to know what evidence that the security services had. They weren't prepared to produce it in court. But we do know that they left this guy for 7 months in prison when a word from them would have set him free.
We do know that. And at the same time, we don't know all the ins and outs. And clearly there are issues like probably secret intelligence being at play here that we can't get to hear and we won't get to hear about. So whatever, it was a bit of a mess on the part of the government and was something of an own goal in all of this, I would say.
Dr Sabir, where do you think we are on this balance? Has it already moved too far up the line to really do damage to civil liberties?
Absolutely. I mean, there is, as has already been stated, there is a fine balance that needs to be struck. But I think that balance always seems to tip in favor of increased security measures as opposed to ensuring and sustaining elements of freedom in a free and democratic society. I mean, what we're seeing now with the Home Secretary's recent statement at the Tory Party conference is the introduction of so-called banning orders or extremism disruption orders. And what these orders and ideas essentially do is they allow the state to target those ideas which are not criminal under the terrorism legislation, and essentially to kind of sideline and marginalize them. And I think this is an extremely counterproductive and, in fact, dangerous approach in responding to the threat of political violence. The best and the most appropriate way to address political violence, along with the causes of political violence, is to create free spaces in which people can discuss and debate exactly why they may be attracted to certain narratives and to the concept of political violence. Political violence prospers and perpetuates in an environment, as do the justifications for political violence, when states come down extremely harshly on those spaces in which discussion and debate should be taking. So I think there is a fine balance that needs to be struck, but I do think that in the context of British UK counter-terrorism policy, that balance always seems to tip in favour of increased security at the cost of reduced liberty, and that's extremely problematic.
Dr. Richards, obviously all this takes place in the context of the conflicts in Iraq and Syria. In terms of minimising the impact on individuals who might be inclined to commit terrorist acts, do you think the government was at fault in the earlier stages of the Syria conflict in talking up support for for some of the armed groups challenging Assad? Because as Mozambique said, I think, during one of the interviews, at that point, it looked as if going to Syria and siding with the opposition was in line with government policy.
Well, yes, and I have some sympathy with that. And clearly the Syria situation is incredibly complicated. And as various people have said recently, that the Islamic State, as awful as they are, and let's remember they are pretty awful. They do have supporters, and they do supporters in the region. They do have groups with legitimate grievances who have flirted with them and got involved with them. So it certainly isn't a black and white situation. And of course, whenever you intervene or play a role in these sorts of incredibly complex conflicts and disputes, you almost inevitably lay yourself open to hypocrisies and double standards and getting involved where perhaps you ought to stay out of it.
Dr. Sabir, do you think that some damage is done to what might be a legitimate case by things that look or can look to people as if they're kind of politically generated theatre almost? I mean, I'm thinking now of the arrest of Anjem Choudary. Now, we might disagree with his views, but he was arrested on suspicion of terrorism at the very moment when the vote for involvement in Iraq was going through Parliament, and then he was instantaneously released on bail. And then people must wonder whether or not, if he is suspected of terrorism, do you let terrorists out on bail?
Well, the key question or the key concept you must remember is that Anjem Choudary and his friends were picked up for encouraging terrorism, which does not require a criminal intent, i.e. the state is authorized under the law of the land to arrest any individual without actually seeing whether their words indeed encourage anybody to do anything. So the police have this extremely broad power, and those powers and that concept of not requiring a criminal intent very much go to the heart of many of the offences contained within the terrorism legislation. Also, you have to understand that if Anjem Choudary and his friends are being arrested and detained and interrogated for having so-called or alleged connections to ISIS in Iraq and Syria, then you have to recognize that there is a wider political objective as much as there is a military one to such actions. This concept of this conflict that is taking place, in which Britain is a key member of, fighting against ISIS, is a situation of counterinsurgency. And as David Galula, the famous French counterinsurgency, said, counterinsurgency warfare is 80% political action and 20% military action. And arrests such as Anjem Choudhury's clearly seem to indicate that these are politically motivated activities that are taking place in the UK. But it goes beyond Anjem Choudhury's case. It goes to the heart of Mozambique's case. Mozambique's case, the question was asked earlier of the other speaker, what is its significance? Well, actually, it's extremely significant, but because I think, and this is obviously extremely difficult to empirically prove unless you have an admission by the government or the security pundits that are running the military operations in the UK and beyond, is that there's this new form of communicative practice known as strategic communication, which is the taking of action, purposeful action, in order to communicate messages to larger groups of people in order to change and alter their behavior. Now, if you read military doctrine, which I have read, and you look at the actions such as the arrest of Mozambique, it would seem to be in synthesis with such doctrine, and that is that these actions are being politically taken in order to cause an alteration in the wider Muslim community so as to ensure the Muslim community do not become involved in the Syria and Iraq conflict in any sense, which of course does go against the very essence of what government policy was towards that part of the world earlier on.
Let me just put that point to Dr. Richards. Do you think that what they did was kind of, I suppose Dr. Sabir's point is, it was a kind of theoretically informed action on the part of the security services with Mozambique, that they were thinking of having this impact. Do you read it that way?
Well, I would and I wouldn't agree with that. The bit I would agree with is that there's a huge dollop of politics involved in all these activities. The arrest of Mozambique, various arrests, Theresa May talking about enhanced counter-terrorism powers and so on. This is raw politics, and a lot of it is to do with the Conservatives trying to win votes from a particular section of society. Whether it's the sort of persuasive politics directed at the Muslim community, as the last speaker has just said, I'm not sure. I mean, there could be something in that. I think probably more important is that this is trying to respond to a strong sense in a large part of the British population, many of whom the Conservatives hope will vote for them rather than vote for UKIP, that strong-hand tactics need to be taken, that unspeakable things need to be said. And of course, Theresa May loves doing that sort of thing. And the Conservatives, who, remember, are very much on the back foot with UKIP and so on, are trying to move to the right and demonstrate that they're tough on terrorism and they're prepared to go that step further. So I would say those elements are probably as significant, if not more so, than the messages going towards the Muslim community.
OK, well, Dr. Richards, that brings us to the end of that segment of the programme and to the end of the programme, I'm afraid. I want to thank all my guests for taking part and to thank you at home for watching. Do remember that you can follow us on Twitter @IslamChannel and use the hashtag #TheReport. Well, we'll be back tomorrow evening at the same time, but for now, we're going to leave you with some footage of pilgrims at Mecca joining in what's been called the Hajj selfie craze. The picture snapping has attracted criticism from many scholars, but most pilgrims seem to be having a good time. Good night.